Welcome everyone, this is Kerjims channel. Now we are back to our episodes of two semi-random champions and comparison featured by Wild the League of Legends versus the Mobile Legend Bang Bang. But before that, please like and subscribe to my channel and don't forget to click the bell icon so you will be notified to our new next episode video. Let's do this!
Urgot's passive is Echoing Flame. Attacking an enemy near one of Urgot's 6 legs will fire on a blast like a shotgun, damaging all enemies in the area. Each leg has its own internal cooldown. Additionally, multiple Echoing Flames for the same target deal reduced damage. In lane, Urgot's passive, combined with his ranged auto attack, let him weaken his opponent before he goes for the kill. But be careful, the cooldown on each leg is quite long at lower levels, so if your legs are down, you're the one who's weak. Corrosive Charge, which explodes at a location, damaging and slowing everything around it. Enemy champion struck are locked onto. Locked onto for what? That's up next. His Purge. When activated, he gains a shield and slow resist, but lowers his base movement speed for several seconds. While the effect holds, he automatically fires the nearest enemy, or preferentially, the nearest locked onto enemy champion. Like you'd expect, these attacks will trigger your passive at the correct angles, which means you'll want to reposition around your opponent to get all the damage and goodness. His Disdain. Urgot charges, damaging and pushing aside all enemies he tramples. If he runs into an enemy champion, he'll stop, stun them, throw them behind him, and lock onto them. If Urgot runs into a wall with Disdain, he'll stop at the wall, but won't stun or throw it over his head. Getting on the other side of your opponents can be incredibly difficult, so it's hard to shoot all 6 Echoing Flames. Thankfully, Disdain puts your target right behind you if it connects, allowing you to get more bang for your buckshot. Urgot's ultimate is Fear Beyond Death. Urgot fires out and impales the first enemy champion struck, damaging, slowing base from the missing health, and locking onto them for the duration of the tether. While impaled, things get scary for Urgot's foe. If they fall low enough, Urgot may recast Fear Beyond Death to seal their doom. He suppresses his prey and pulls his chains back in. When his target finally reaches him, he brutally executes them. If Urgot successfully grinds an enemy, he terrifies the living who still remain. Purge churns out a ton of damage, but it's up to you to make sure it hits the right targets. Locking onto the right one is paramount to avoid wasting all your damage and getting off on the wrong foot. Knee. Urgot may be beefy, but he is not a tank. His ranges are low, so he'll need good positioning not only to maximize his damage, but also to simply stay alive. Stay on the fringes of a fight, looking for the perfect moment to harvest your first victim with Fear Beyond Death. Try to draw an opponent out and unload your rotation on them. Once they're low, you can go for the execute even if they try to run away. From there, it's cleanup time. Focus the targets who can't escape you, and take them down one at a time. The most important skill to learn with Urgot is choosing the right moment to go all in. Done right, you'll go from Urgot to Urgot. Urgot is a champion who, no matter what, once you hit level 6, you are online and you have the potential to win any matchup. It can seem a little scary in the early game, but once you master this machine of death, you will be pumping out wins left and right. Here at GameLink, we are all about giving you guys the best guides with information from challenger level players to make sure that you can smash and win in your games. So make sure you smash the like button for that free +1 to your MMR, execute the sub button with your ultimate, and let's jump right in. First things first, everybody makes this mistake. Or, well, everybody's a strong word, but seriously, don't be that guy. Do not spam your Q and link. Your first ranged ability, do not just spam it, because once you use 3 of them and realize, oh, I have less than 100 mana, you're gonna be in deep trouble. And right now you might be asking, yo Ace, why do I even bother putting a point in ability if I can't really use it without running out of mana? And the answer is that it's a tool for ganks.
Did the enemy jungler just walk into your lane and you're just about in the midway point? Blast that man in a kneecap and just walk out of there. Just run. You can 2v1, but you probably shouldn't until you hit level 6. And then this is the part where people make the second worst mistake that you can make. When people are already in range with their abilities of you. The enemy Shen who's trying to taunt you, if you not just stop and sit there for a full second and charge up, you're taunted and killed. You need to just take advantage of the fact that you just slowed the enemy down so much that you could just mosey on over to your tower with no problem. Flash on top of you or something like that, but don't use it right away when the slow is ticking away. That small delay where you're sitting still from your E is all they need to flash, dash, or whatever else on top of you and then get you killed. Your entire purpose as Urgot is to survive the early game and scale up, and you spike really hard at level 6, but you spike even harder at level 9. So, unless somebody is just willingly taking a bunch of auto attacks from you, you're probably never gonna have an opportunity to safely kill them early on. Urgot is a reactionary champion in the early game. If somebody dives on top of you, you can make them stay on top of you for longer than they could ever want, and you're probably gonna win the trade thanks to your shield and CC. You even have the ability to disengage from your opponents, buffering it. No matter what happens, if you're stunned or if you're pulled away by a blitzcrank, if you use your E properly, your movement will take priority and you will move away from your opponents even while CC. This can make or break some matchups like fighting against the Singed and predicting his flank. This is not easy, and we'll talk about it more later because it gets more relevant in the later stages of the game in order to make Urgot a better champion into very tricky team fights. Now you have pretty much every tool that you need in order to survive. But surviving the early game is more than just not wasting your mana, and it's more than just waiting for your opponent to come to you where you are strong. You also need to make sure that you aren't shoving the minion wave out ridiculously hard with your passive. Like, come on guys, really, the game paints you a gigantic circle with sections that show you when your shotgun knees are up. Stop hitting the wave if you notice that you have that knee up in particular. Yes, hit the CS to make sure you get it, but always try and aim so that you're not just blasting the entire minion wave with your passive. If you don't watch out for this, you're just gonna push into the enemy 24/7 and you're gonna get ganked and you're gonna die. It's guaranteed at that point, because you won't have enough in the early game to survive or 2v1. If you're unsure and don't know how to manage a wave properly, especially with a difficult champion like Urgot, then you should definitely go check out our website where we have guides on just that. When you see somebody pushing 24/7, that's how you know that they definitely haven't been to our website, and you can easily abuse them for it because you know all the tricks. A tip so that you can try and avoid this as much as possible is to make sure that you get some harass on your opponent and use your knees that way. Then, once you have those knees down, use that section to farm the minion wave so that you aren't just plain breathing it into non-existence. If your opponent spends the entire laning phase inside their minion wave, then unfortunately there's no real good way for you to get rid of it and not have to worry about pushing. But when they start doing that, that's when you can call your jungler over and just make them absolutely miserable with your massive Q slows on every single gank that your jungler tries. Keyword being tries, because not every jungler you have in your game is going to be somebody who knows what they're doing. And I mean, the same could be said for the rest of your teammates, let's be real. Hopefully by now you've hit level 6. Maybe you aided your ally in a gank and have a pretty solid lead. If so, that's amazing. But if you're still 0-0-0 and farming away as a champion who scales pretty well, you have hit the point where you have your ultimate and now you are online. If you have flash and the opponent is actually in lane, you should just kill. Like, there's no excuse here, guys. If you're looking to snowball super hard, you have the ability to kill your opponent right there in that moment. Physical combo that can take just about anybody from 100 to 0 onto the gray screen. This is the bread and butter combo of Urgot that gets him killed when people least expect it. You need to practice this and get it down because it's a little bit tricky. It involves flash buff to make it so that your opponent doesn't expect the range of your CC that immediately chains into all the rest of your abilities. The window of timing that you have between flash is pretty small, and it's even smaller if you try to do it pretty much perfectly so that your opponent is as surprised as possible. Thankfully though, if you do it too early, it might still work, and if you do it too late, well, nothing's gonna happen to your flash, because when you're in the middle, all other abilities are turned off and disabled. You can just back off and try again. Hopefully the enemy jungler isn't there or something like that, and you didn't just randomly in the middle of the lane. Well, I mean, then you're the one to blame. Like, that's your mistake. Don't blame your jungler for that one. If you're a bit behind on items, or they're playing a particularly tanky champion, you're obviously not going to be able to 100 to 0 your opponent. Maybe they have a built-in shield and damage reduction like Garen, or whatever else they might have. It's not going to work. So instead, you need to start resorting to actually you have more mana to deal with it. Outside of the general rule of thumb of harassing your opponent with auto attacks whenever they go to auto attack CS to secure it, you should also enemy is dancing around their wave to slow them down and get in range for an auto attack or maybe two. Bonus points if you do it when they actually go for CS, so it's basically unmissable. At that point, you're able to walk up for even more auto attacks and get more harass, and if you do happen to push the wave with your passive, it's not that big of a deal because you have your summoner spells, you have your ultimate, and now you're actually strong. Especially once you hit level 9, when you have the Pain Train, you are permanently high attack speed, super good damage, have good mobility, have good CC, you got it all. By now with your Black Cleaver, the enemy's armor buys aren't gonna mean as much as they would like it to, especially when you consider that your ultimate executes them before they get as much value out of their survivability as possible. By now there's a couple other ability tricks that will come in handy when you're trying to survive, particularly in the later stages of the game, but might also show up in the early game too. First thing, it's important to know that where if you click the button immediately before being hit by a CC, you'll still be able to go through the dash, and this can counter other people who have stuff like Flames from Singe or Poppy ultimates and anything in between. Does the enemy team have a blitzcrank? Well, you can safely sit in front of your team for the entire game and not have to worry about getting caught out, because assuming that you have good enough reaction times, you can just press E every time he presses Q, and then you never ever get hooked into the enemy team unless you really wanted to. Things get more complicated if they have like 3 hooks, 40 CCs, and a million slows, but you get the idea. Outside of just being a very good frontliner, Urgot is also an amazing champion when he's on a flank, especially if he can get into the backline with his ultimate. Even if you aren't necessarily executing the enemy AD carry, even if you're executing the enemy top lane tank, you can still do something really amazing by flashing into the enemy team while you're chopping them up. Once Urgot fully kills and finishes grinding, has a large AoE fear that lasts for a pretty long time, and getting this on multiple people on the enemy team gives your whole team a massive opening to take advantage of, and even if you're by yourself, it can easily net you 1 or 2 more kills in like a 1v4 scenario, and that's ridiculous. You can easily disable multiple people at the same time and prevent supports from peeling carries, while also preventing the carries from being able to do damage, and when they're that useless, it's just easy picking. There is almost always a way for Urgot to play a given team fight or skirmish, even when he's at a numbers disadvantage, because of how powerful his ultimate is. He does have some natural counters, like people who can go invincible like Kale or Tryndamere, but that doesn't stop him from being insanely valuable in a ton of scenarios, and so flexible that he can split push or team fight against basically anybody. Some of you might have been wondering why successfully execute somebody, he still forces them to spend a ton of gold on an item that very well might only be useful against Urgot's one ability, and then it doesn't help against any of Urgot's damage. That was just a quick trip into what your opponents might be thinking in-game, and if they actually make the mistake of buying the item and feeling like they seriously need it, then you should be happy, because you can just easily beat them out of any fight. After all, QSS only works on one thing, and considering that you, as Urgot, have 3 CCs and 3 different abilities, you might just end up killing them anyways. Now, we've broken down a lot, but we haven't given you guys the runes and items that you're going to be looking for yet in order to actually scale and be an absolute monstrous machine. So, for runes on Urgot, if you are facing tanks and you don't need early game presence, you just take Conqueror with Triumph, Tenacity, Coup de Grace, Conditioning, and Revitalize.